Next in our classical tradition unit, we're going to be looking at the traditional artwork of ancient Rome.
The Roman Empire that we're looking at right now lasted between roughly 27 BC and went all the way through 476 AD. So long span of time, similar to when we're talking about Greece. This is a long time period. And they get a lot of credit for inventing some really useful things like concrete. So they were able to build a lot of really big buildings. So their architecture is really impressive. Now their sculpture, on the other hand, they started out by really just copying Greek sculptures. And I don't mean just imitating. I mean, they would literally cast the Greek sculptures that they found and make replicas and say, look what I did. So it kind of starts off looking a lot like ancient Greece.
Eventually, they did begin to kind of branch off in their own direction. And it was different in the fact that, if you'll remember from yesterday when we talked about Greece, they used idealism. And so everybody kind of looked similar and everybody looked kind of like a perfected version. But in ancient Rome, they began to use verism, which is an extreme realism. They call it like the warts and all. So they would depict people exactly how they looked. And it was important because they did a lot of busts, and a bust is basically a sculpture from the shoulders up. And they would do busts of politicians. And you got to think, they didn't have print. They didn't have TV at the time. So the only way you could know what your head of state looked like is through sculptures. And so they would show wrinkles and big noses and things like that. They wanted you to be able to recognize Caesar and all of these politicians that helped to run this large empire.
Yes, I mean, if you were going to commission a Roman artist to sculpt a portrait of you, a bust of you, I mean, you had to be mentally prepared for the outcome, that it was going to be 100% truthful, possibly even exaggerating if you had any very prominent features, just so that it would be recognizable to the everyday person. And everyday people really were going to be seeing a lot of these artworks. They might be featured in some of these really large buildings. The most famous building that was created during the Roman Empire has to be the Colosseum. Just to kind of switch gears and talk about architecture for a second, the Colosseum was just this major undertaking, and even the columns and the arches and everything on there would have taken years and years and years to construct. But thankfully, they had that concrete to help them, piece it all together bit by bit.
Right. It might look here that it's only, 4 stories tall, but each of those colonnades or row of rounded arches are actually several stories tall. So this is massive, has lots of entries, and so it's actually kind of like a starting off point for a lot of modern arenas, kind of base their layout on the Colosseum, which is just remarkable considering how old it is. Now, today, of course, it's in a little bit of ruin.
And at one point, they tried to fill it with water and use it to reenact naval battles. We know that gladiators fought there, so it was really an entertainment arena. And even at one point later on in history, it was used to store ammunition, and all kinds of things have gone wrong with this place. So the fact that there's any of it left is pretty remarkable.